This is a recording for the CUPHAT project. My name is Chris McCann. Today is the 21st of June 2023 and I have with me here Tony Asple. Thank you, Tony. Can you confirm for the recorder that you're happy to take part in this project?
Yes, I am.
And could you spell your name for the recorder, please?
Tonyasple.
Excellent. Okay, so to start with, perhaps if you could tell us where you were born and your first memories of this area.
I was born in Wexford Hospital in 1963 and my home was in Glenglass, Killan for the first 15 years or so of my life. I lived there with my mum, my dad and my younger sister Maeve, who is 6 years younger than me. And Glenglass is on Glown Gloss for anybody who doesn't know, which means the Green Glen. And if you drive along the road from Burns Cross to Ballyhighland and on that road and you look to your right, you see the green fields and you see it's a glen and you see the mountains up ahead. So they were quite correct in their terminology and naming of the area. And my earliest memories, I suppose, are of growing up in that area, and for the first 6 years of my life I was on my own. I had no brothers or sisters, and I did a lot of I suppose playing around with a football and a bicycle and having imaginary friends. There was no one really around that my age in that area at that particular time. And then my sister came along 6 years later, and I used to we had good times together as she was growing up. Unfortunately, in 1971 my father got killed in an accident in Rackardsif, Killan, and that left us in a bit of a turmoil for a long time. And I suppose, like anything, you never really get over a death, especially a close death, like your parents or siblings or friends or neighbours, but you just learn to deal with it. And 8 years later my mother died of a brain hemorrhage. That was 1979, and we moved then over to my grandmother and grandfather, my aunt, her children, and her husband, and another man who lived in the house all his life, Tom Kerwin. And we lived there in Borreview with them until we flew the nest when years caught up on us, and as everybody does. And now we both have our own families, and she lives in Germany and she has 2 kids over there. She's married to a German guy. She's over there about 30 years at this stage, I would say. And I happened on a girl from Clonroach. Didn't have to move too far away, and I got married, and we're here, and we're married 31 years this year. And I have 3 children at the moment, 27, 25 and 22. So it won't be long until we're probably in empty nest syndrome, as they call it. Growing up in Glenglass was very good. Apart from the death of my dad at such a young age, he was only 40, and but we had great neighbours and great friends, and my mother had a lot of callers to make sure that, as well as her mother, my grandmother, to make sure we were all okay and stuff like that. But we did suffer a bit, I suppose, because my mother didn't drive, and anytime she did drive, it was just as well she didn't. So she wasn't a very confident driver, so she stopped and she sold the car, and it meant really we were stranded as such. So I used to hitch a ride to town, a lift to town in Enniscorthy, and for messages and stuff like that, or my grandmother would bring us to town and get stuff. And then my mother happened on another man, and she had a relationship with him for a while until she died, really. And he had a car, and so we used to get to town more easily then at that stage. But my mother had a business. My father worked for Bobby Record in Killan, and unfortunately he was falling a tree one day, and it kinked the wrong way, a big old beech tree which was probably rotten in the middle, and it caught him, and he died on admission to hospital. But we learned to cope, and as you do, and things got better as the years went on. But unfortunately, as I said, my mother died in 1979 of a brain hemorrhage herself, and that was the end of our period in Glenglass. Our neighbours were halls. They were just almost across the field from us, really, and they were elderly at the time. They had a workman called Dan Dooley, and Dan was a bit of a character himself, and he was always very jovial, and he came from Rathnewer, and actually Halls at Glenglass was the last parish in Rathnewer, and we were in Rathnewer ourselves, but we actually went to school and went to mass and came because it was closer to us. And when transport wasn't as so prolific as it is now, everybody has a car and stuff, you went to the nearest place, and halls were elderly even, and I grown up, they were in their late 70s and early 80s, and Dan, their workman, was there, and they still used a horse even up to 78, 79. When my mother died, they were still using a horse for a lot of the work, and they'd hire in Martin Buckley from Ballyhighland to do some tractor work. They were still milking cows by hand. They only had a small few cows, but they were still milking them by hand at that stage, and everything was done the old way. They had an old farmhouse and a big open fire, and I remember my first memory of the place was going in with my mother, because my mother used to work there a couple of days a week, and my father, actually, when he was alive, he used to shave Lawrence Hall, Mr. Hall I used to call him. He used to shave him once a week on a Saturday night, so he'd be clean shaven for Sunday morning, and we used to watch. He had a television. We didn't have a television at the time, but they had a television, and Here's Lucy was a very funny program on the television at that time. So my father and my mother and myself and my sister, we used to go over, although my sister was only a baby, at the time she wouldn't have really realised what was happening, but we used to go over to shave Lawrence Hall in at the same time that Here's Lucy would be on in the television, so it would coincide with that. And eventually then I suppose it wasn't too long more and we got a TV ourselves, but we stayed at home then to watch Here's Lucy on our own TV, but my father still went over to shave Lawrence. Times have moved on along since then, but they're some of the stories. My grandfather had lived over the road from us, and my grandmother in Ballyhighland, just a short walk over the road towards the hill, and he actually fought with the Irish Rifles in World War One, and I never knew much about that until he died really, but he never talked about it much, but if you asked him stuff, I was told that he wouldn't really talk about it, but if you were out in the field working with him, he could bring it up and he'd speak about it. And he got shot down on the right side with a Bren gun, and he was injured, but he didn't die. The range of the Bren gun was just going out of range when it hit him, and his wounds healed, but he still could put your fingers into the holes in his side where he had got shot. And he was in Palestine at one stage as well, and he told the story of having to bury 16 of his own Wexford men in one day. And he also said that there was a British Army officer who came to him. His name was Nick Asple, Nicholas, and he said, "Nick," he said, "do you realise you are walking where our Lord walked?" And he reputedly said to him, Well, I'll tell you this much, sir. I would rather be walking where I was walked myself as I was born, where I was born, rather than where my Lord was born at the moment. And you could understand why he would say such a thing. War was a horrible thing in any time or any year, but World War One was especially brutal with trench warfare and all the rest of it. And I suppose that's one of the reasons why he didn't talk about it much.
Would there have been many others from around this area who would have fought in that war?
There would have been, yeah. My wife's grandfather fought as well, yeah, and he got injured as well and got shot and went back again. You know, some people would say like that you know, that it was frowned upon and they were looked at on as traitors, but they weren't really. You know, I mean, at that time, it was a job as well as everything else. There was money coming in to the house by being in the army, and also there was the opinion that we were under British rule, and there was the opinion that if enough of Irish went out and fought for the British, that they would look favourably on us and maybe give us our independence that way. You know, there was all sorts of views at the time. You know, and but a lot of it, I suppose, as well as that, was that young lads wanted adventure, and everybody was being told that the war would be over in a few weeks, and it didn't happen that way. And as we know, it was pretty brutal, and many Irish people lost their lives. I was over in Mons, actually, in Belgium. We played there for St. Patrick's Day, a bit of music, myself and Martin Codd and Eddie Doyle and Hazel and another friend of mine, Martin Ryan, and Francis McCabe and Ann Dempsey. We were over another year, and we played in an Irish pub over there. But in Mons, in the square, there is you can go under the arch into the municipal building, and they have a plaque to all the Irish people who helped liberate Mons from the Nazis in World War One and in World War Two as well. And it really would bring it home to you when you see all the names, you know, the Irish names, Dooleys, Breens, Murphys, O'Connors, you name it, almost every name is there. My father was, they were the ones who fell, trying to defend the city from the Nazis at the time. Now, my grandfather, luckily enough, survived and came back to be able to tell the tale.
What about so you went to school in Caen? What was that like, going to school?
Caen was okay. Yeah, Caen was it was a small school at the time. I went to the old school first, maybe for about a year, and that was down below the church, on the left hand side, and the graveyard is. You had the graveyard coming into Caen first on the left hand side, then you had the church, and then it's now a community centre, but that was the old school. And my memory of that was of two big open fires at each end of the school, each end, and it was only divided by a curtain, a big heavy curtain. That's all that divided the classrooms, and there would be the bigger boys would be sent out to get sticks for the fire, and so on. I wasn't there too long until the new school was opened, and I mean, there was flushing toilets and hot and cold water and central heating and all that, you know. And people, all the mammies were I remember them saying like that. The children will get their death of cold because they'll come out of that warm environment with central heating, and they'll be going home and there won't be any central heating at home, and they'll get their death of cold. But none of us died anyway, so it was it wasn't as bad as they thought. But nobody had central heating at the time, so I suppose in a school to have central heating was a big thing, you know. Caen was a good school. I had many happy memories there, and made many friends, and still have them today, you know, in national school. I went then to the vocational school in Enniscorthy. It was known more as the Tech at that time, and for some people it was kind of a school that was looked down upon, because it was considered that the people who weren't academically capable went to the Tech, which wasn't actually quite true. Some people went to the tech because they weren't academically minded, but didn't mean that they were stupid or thick. They became carpenters and plumbers and all sorts of trades, electricians, and you name it, and others became school teachers, and others and scientists, and all the nurses and doctors and all the others, trades and careers that you could mention. But it was just always, it was kind of frowned upon, and some people just left early, and that happened in both schools, really. But the Christian Brothers were the people who had the other secondary school, and the Mercy, and they were run by the religious orders, and I suppose back then they were considered the better schools,
And what did you do at the vocational college? What did you like? What did you specialise in?
I liked everything, really. I didn't mind, never minded school, there were subjects I wasn't great at, but and there was other subjects I liked, but I liked them all, really. I wasn't great at maths and mental maths. I was, making stuff up in your head was a bit too much for me. But it's funny, as I got older and left school, I found it a lot easier. I suppose in school you have to learn it, where when you're older you want to learn it, and there's a difference there, I suppose, But any of the metalwork or the carpentry or whatever we did, all them little bits would stand to you in practical terms, even though you mightn't have become a fitter or a welder or a carpenter. You would still be able to do lots of handiwork, So it did make a big difference, I suppose, to our lives that we wouldn't have realised at the time, But when you get your own house and you have to do something and you know how to do it, it saves calling a tradesman, When I went to Rathnure and moved over with my grandmother and that, it was a very stressful time for both myself and my sister, but we got on all right, and we got our own careers going, and I started off, really, I went to, after leaving school, I didn't go to college, I went to ANCO, and ANCO was like Solus now, and you would learn, you would apply for a course and hope you got in, and if you wanted an apprenticeship you had to get sponsored by somebody that was going to take you on after you got your initial training. I actually done a course in TV and radio servicing and stuff like that, video recorders and all that at the time. When I came out of that, after a year, there was done some London City and Guilds exams or whatever, but there was no actual really work at it as such, and I ended up getting a job in Slaney Meats in Bunclody, and we were started off working for £2 an hour, and it was bad money, but it was better than staying at home and being on the dole, but it was hard work, but I discovered that the guys over on the other side of the belt, where I was, the conveyor belt, they were the boners and the trimmers and the butchers and all that, and where I was taking home £85 a week at the time, back in 1982-83, they were actually making that in a day. So I realised quickly that if I wanted to stay there, that I needed to be at the other side of the belt. So after a few months I did get in there, and I got to know how to do the boning and the trimming, and the most important thing was to do it correctly and cleanly, but do it fast, because you got paid by what you did. It was piecework, and I worked there it was seasonal, but you got a good season out of it, and you were taxed to the hilt all right at the time. I remember paying 58 pence in the pound tax and another 7% PRSI on top of that, and a few of us left then, and we started working contracting around the country, some on a self-employed basis, and there was also the factories would pay your accommodation and things like that. So we got a bit of cash from the factories as well, which was no harm, as expenses and whatever else, and we were able to make a lot more money, and we were able to see a bit of the country as well. So that was a good experience as well. And when that finished, I did a few different things, and then I put a meat van on the road myself. I called into houses and shops, and mostly houses, a few shops and a few restaurants, but mostly houses. And I did that for 5.5 years, and I just got tired of it. It didn't make a living or anything like that, but it's like a bread round or a milk round or anything like that. You're tied to it, and it's difficult to take a day off because you need to show somebody the round, then they have to be good at selling, and so on and so on. So I stopped, and Aircom was being deregulated at the time, and myself and a friend of mine set up a small company, and we had sales reps out on the road and ourselves selling cheaper electricity for electricity, and cheaper phone calls from some of the alternative companies that had come in, because under EU law the national telecommunications company had to be deregulated. It was a bit of an opportunity to make a few more pound and do something different for a while. We knew it would be short-lived, but we were happy enough to do it while it lasted, and we got on okay at that as well, you know.
And what time was that?
That was around 1999, yeah, around 1999, and we did that for a couple of years, maybe until 2001 or 2, you know. We knew we'd have a short period at it, but as I said, make hay while the sun shone, you know, because we knew the market would get saturated, and you see, Aircom or Telecom Éireann at the time, they had they increased their prices by a government rule. The Minister for Communications at the time, I think it was the guy from Offaly, McGowan, I can't think of his name now, but he was the minister, and he upped the price of electricity, so we were paying a little below average, as far as I remember, for our telephone calls than our European neighbours at the time. But he upped it that we were now paying the dearest amount for our telephone calls in Europe, and of course that made it very attractive for other companies to come in then, and then Aircom had to get, or Telecom Éireann at the time had to give away 50% of their business anyway, and they couldn't compete then with, because their prices were so high, they couldn't compete, and it was easy for the alternative companies to come in. So that's just one of these things. You see an opportunity and you try and make the best of it while the opportunity is there, and move on again then, you know.
A lot of what you described there is about sort of social change, and you sort of mentioned like periods where there'd be a change in a certain practice, you know, telecommunications or something.
Yeah.
And that there was a kind of end to that. What are some other changes that you've noticed, particularly around this area, from over the years? Okay, well, I suppose the biggest change is the transport, the amount of people who have a car. I mean, when I was growing up, lots of people didn't have a car. Even in the late 60s, early 70s, a lot of people didn't have a car, and a lot of people still rode bicycles, and they would get a lift with a local farmer to town because he would have a car of a Saturday once a week or whatever. And that was another thing. People went to town once a week really and got their shopping. They went to the local shops for the bread and the milk and the convenience stuff, and the eggs and whatever. But in the now everybody has a car and that, but they had and there was lots of shops around. Like there was a shop in Came, there was Patsy Doyle's post office in Killaan, there was Lizzie Burns in Killaan, there was a couple of shops in Kilteely, there was Vin Cod's and Conran's in Rathnewer. I mean, and I could go on, you know, and shops, of course, shops in Clonroach here. And most of them small country shops have gone now completely because the supermarkets in town have taken over. And not only that, but everybody has a car, so or a bike or a motorbike or some mechanically propelled vehicle that they can get to town very quickly and get their stuff. And of course they have much more selection and all the rest of it. So when I was growing up, my neighbours who didn't have a car,
were only maybe elderly and bad on the legs, they would come to my mother's house. My mother, my house, our house in Glenglass in Killan, and my mother always she knitted both on the machine and by hand, and she had an agency for iron jumpers as well, and so it used to help supplement the widow's pension, and so people would come with their jumpers and their that they would have knitted or to get knitted for. She used to make a lot of school uniform jumpers and knit them on an old knitmaster machine. And when we'd be trying to watch telly in the evenings, you'd hear them wang 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 with the machine going over and back. So we got on to her about that a few times, and she ended up doing most of her knitting in the daytime, and she'd do the sewing in the nighttime. So when she was watching TV, so we wouldn't hear the noise of the machine when we were trying to watch our favourite cartoons or whatever. But and the neighbours would come, as I said, especially the elderly neighbours, and they would be looking for something from the shop, and I would be sent to the shop on the bicycle for the cigarettes and the bread and the milk, and oftentimes I would only be after coming back when some other neighbour would be after coming in and saying, will you go to the shop for me? And I'd have to go to the shop again, that was just the way life was. But you wouldn't have that anymore. That was some of the biggest changes, because everybody has transport now, and people had nothing then compared to what they have now, but they didn't have any debt either, so there wasn't the same stresses on people and the same anxiety, I suppose, over stuff, because if you didn't have anything, everybody did it out it if they didn't have it, and they didn't get into big debt to get something. And I suppose therefore they were never in danger of really losing their house, or the interest rates going up and all the rest of it. That didn't bother anybody at all. Most people gave their few shillings to the council every week for their house, and they could pay off stuff on a weekly or a monthly basis, insurance or coal or whatever you wanted. There was always a way of getting it. But I suppose the other thing that has that has changed from when I was growing up is that basically people didn't have bungalows. Only started coming in the early 70s, and prefabricated houses and stuff like that. Up to that, most people, if you didn't have a farm and you weren't a farmer, you with a farmhouse, you lived in a cottage, a 2 up 2 down, or the one with the long hall in it, or the other one. There was a couple of different types of cottages which were built at different times of the some of the 2 up 2 downs were built in the late 1800s and up to the 30s, I think, and then they went in the 40s and 50s with different ones and whatever. Ours was the one with the long hall, as they call it, and that was built in 1960. It was built with mass concrete, and my mother and father bought it in 1963. It was built in 1957 or 58, and they got married in 1960. And the people who were Phelans who were moving away to England, and my parents got the cottage off of them. But with them cottages, everybody had an acre of ground and a pig house. So you could have your own pigs, and you could either sell them in the mart, or you could kill them yourself and cure them. And everybody grew their own potatoes and veg, and whatever was left was usually taken up with strawberries. And the strawberries were a great crop for the cottager, because if you had a good year of strawberries, the check from Robinson's or Fruitfield or whoever you were selling the strawberries to in Dublin, the jam makers, it would all come in one batch. You'd have the check, and the check would take you through the winter, and even until people bought their cars out of the new cars out of the strawberry money. It helped the cottager who didn't have a lot of money at the time and was working for farmers, and the wages wouldn't have been great, but it would have sustained them at the same time, and they found the strawberry picking, and even though it was labour intensive and all the rest of it. Usually you'd have a kid, your own children would be picking the fruit, so you didn't have, if you had enough of children, you wouldn't have to employ pickers, so all the money stayed in the family. And my sister-in-law Kathleen Houlihan actually wrote a great article about that, which I've furnished to you, and she's given me permission to give it to you for your research and whatever, so I'm sure you'll be able to put a link on your website or wherever to it as time goes on. But it was brilliant. It was a lifesaver for the cottager. And then of course times got better, factories started to open, and people got jobs in factories, and people got jobs in other areas. And Anco and would have been, I don't know what would have been before Anco, if Anco was the first, but that helped get people trained in trades and things like that, where they would be able to be electricians and carpenters and plumbers and so on, and they would be able to rise up in income, and that helped along the society as well as we know it now. And nobody, the strawberries now are gone back to the big growers again, and in glass houses and polytunnels and stuff like that. But the cottager doesn't need them anymore, so they weren't really taking any business from the poor cottager, if you like, because they were after rising above that at that stage, you know. But I remember my father coming home from work, and the first thing he'd do during this time of the year, he'd have to go down to the acre at the back of the house to see what was the picking like, you know. If the picking was good, there was smiles all around, you know. And the lorry from Robinson's or from Fruitfield would come down, and they would pick up the strawberries every couple of days. You could go to Bunclody, you could go to Ratduff in Rathnure. There was different, or Watty Leary's in Rathnure. There was different pick-up points where everybody brought their fruit to at the end of every day or so, or every couple of days, and then they brought them back to Dublin. And there were no refrigeration. You put acid actually on the raspberries in a tub, and the acid was supposed to preserve them, but it would actually turn the berries white, and you would have to have a mask when you were putting the acid into the raspberry barrels, and then put a lid on it, so you wouldn't be breathing the fumes. There wasn't as much about health and safety then, I suppose. And I suppose at the end of the day, the acid, as strong as it was, didn't do anyone any harm. I've never heard of anyone dying from eating raspberry jam.
Sort of a similar question about the sort of opportunities that were available. You also mentioned earlier, you mentioned the Phelan family moving to England, and you also mentioned that several young men around this area would get work in other parts of Ireland. Was leaving the area common?
Yeah, leaving the area was common. Like a friend of mine now who's now 80, he'll be 86 now this year, he told me that in the late 50s and early 60s, the talk at Mass of a Sunday was who was gone from the week before. It was, and the boat was full, you know, and it was really sad. I suppose England was the most obvious place to go because it was near. It was only a 4-hour boat journey, and as well as that, they had lost an awful lot of men in the war, and they didn't have the men to do the work. Like, it was still only 10, 20 years after the war, you know. And so the young kids that were only being born in wartime were still only in their teens and early 20s. So they needed plenty of men to work. And England provided a good safety net for many a family here, with husbands sending back the money home, you know. And then we had a bit of a boom in the 70s and so on. And in the 80s then, when I was leaving school I'd done the leaving in 81, and there was very little work around, really, and an awful lot of people went to England again and took up work there, and a lot of people went to Australia for a while and went to America for a while. People were able to go further afield then to find work, and a lot of them settled and stayed there. Some came back as well, obviously, because they would miss the home, and the culture of a different country mightn't have suited them as much, but I suppose that's our lot in Ireland here. We've had booms and crashes, and we've had famines and all sorts of things, and over the hundreds of years, and we've always had a few decades when people leave in their thousands, and then that's why I suppose there's over 50 million Irish passports around the world at the moment. But now we have an immigration. We have an influx of people from all over Europe and further afield, and it has led to a good bit of diversity in Ireland, which we thought we'd never see. I mean, I remember my aunt worked in Brownswood in hospital from the time she was about 14, I think, and I remember there was a black doctor in the hospital, and Dr. Kataya and his family, and he was nearly a novelty. He was from Africa, and he was nearly a novelty looking at somebody like that going down through the street or in an escorty, where now you wouldn't cast an eye. We've all sorts of nationalities, colours and creeds, and it makes life a bit more interesting, I suppose. And look at, if they're able to make a living here and get on and send a few bob home, what harm is it? It's only what we did when we had when our country was in a similar position as to what theirs is or was now. Like the Polish economy, for example, is getting better all the time, and a lot of the Polish are going back to Poland. But I was talking to some Polish people, and they said, like, they're because their kids were born here, their children were born here, or because their children were very young when they came, and now the children are in their teens, and the parents might want to feel like going back, but the children don't consider themselves Polish as such. Their culture, their friends, their background is here, and they may have a Polish name, but they're quintessentially Irish. They can speak Polish as well as English, and they're quite happy to stay here. And so the one parent told me that she said, if you want to go home, you may get your child back before they're 12, because other than that they're after bonding with all their Irish friends and other nationalities too. And they're part of the fabric of society, and their homeland really would be somewhat alien to them. They don't mind going back to see their grandparents, but they don't want to stay there.
It's an interesting point you raised there about homeland, and you've obviously settled quite close to where you grew up. What is it about this local area for you then that meant that you've stayed?
Well, I went to work in Germany for a while in 1988, and I've done a couple of small stints in London, but they were only ever, and I worked in Holland for a while, but they were only ever temporary measures, something to do when the meat factories were closed or whatever at the time, and it was somewhere different to be, rather than being at home doing nothing, and that. But what was your question again? But
so what is it? So for the majority of your working life, you've stayed here.
Oh yeah,
so what is it about this area then that?
Well, I suppose you develop roots, and you develop friends in different parts of the county even, and you develop a lifestyle that you like and that's suitable to you, and you just are quite happy to stay. I love travelling and I love seeing new places, but I'm not sure if I'd like to stay anywhere permanently other than where I am. We have a rich culture here, and we've many friends and all the rest of it, and there's lots of stuff to do here, between games, and for myself, music. I've golfing friends, I have music friends, I have all sorts of friends and relations around, and it's important to be close to family as well. It's important. So that's why I stayed. I suppose I met a local girl as well, so that would be another thing, and settled down here, and I'm quite happy here, and have no great intentions of moving anywhere else bar for a holiday.
And then you touched on the music, of course. There, you've and I've seen you play, and the music culture around here is very strong. Perhaps you could tell me about your interest in music and where that started, and what the musical culture is like around.
Okay, well, for me, I always had an interest in music, and when I was growing up in Glenglass, my mother bought me a keyboard, and I never learned properly how to play it, but I was able to bang out a tune by ear, and I enjoyed it, and I gave it up then. When my mother died, I gave up the keyboard and stuff like that, but I always had a good interest in music. I always loved music, and I always had a wish to play the guitar, but I actually never bothered learning until about 15 years ago or so. So I was about 45 or 6 when I bought my first guitar, and my wife said to me, Marie, she said, are you really going to play that? Well, I said, I'll either play it or I'll give it to somebody else who'll play it. But I said, I haven't bought a really expensive one, so I said, it's not going to be the end of the world if I don't, but I said, I'm going to make a stab at it. And where I failed before is wanting to do too much too quickly, and then getting fed up and saying, I'll never do this, but you don't read a book the minute you get it. You learn the alphabet first, and then you learn how to read a couple of words, then you're able to put the words into a sentence and so on, and that's how children learn how to read. And it's no different if you want to play an instrument. You start at the start and don't try and do it all at the one time. And and that's how I started to play then at home here, and was able to bang out a few tunes. And they were playing music up in Conran's. They had started an open mic night, and I knew Martin Codd and Willie Moore, who were playing guitar for years and singing, and had Martin had played with Martin Codd in the show and the Herdsmen. And my aunt, who I went to live with when my mother died, Addie, her husband Peter was a great guitar player. He was actually voted the best lead guitar player in Ireland at one stage in the Spotlight magazine, which was a big thing back in the 60s and early 70s. And so he used to be always playing at home as well, and practicing and stuff. And I always had a love for music anyway. And I rang up Willie or Martin, I can't remember, and I asked him, would it be alright if I went up to Conran's to play a couple of tunes? And of course, when you start playing with other people, then they show you where you're going wrong, or they show you shortcuts to doing things, or they explain different things to you. So I learned a lot from them, and my musical ability grew, and as you get better you love it even more, and that's really where that all started. But it really started as I was a child, because I was able to play the keyboard by ear, and I always loved making music and stuff. And there is a great culture of music around the area, both traditional and all sorts, really. If you go down any road, myself and Paddy Joyce, who is a neighbour who lives over the road there, and he used to play in the show with the show band with Martin Codd as well, and he played the fiddle and the flute and the tin whistle, and we were just sitting down one day over a cup of tea, and we were counting all the houses around the road on all the different directions, and there was very little houses where somebody wasn't able to play some sort of an instrument, which maybe is, I'd say, is probably the same in every parish in Ireland, and it's just something that we have and cherish, and it should be encouraged greatly, and it is being encouraged greatly. And down in Banno, Ballymitty, there's a very, very strong traditional music scene down there for years back, and what they do is they train the younger ones. Then when the younger ones get up, they train the other younger ones coming on, and so it's a continuous cycle, and it's great. And they do it in school now as well. Like, in Clonroach here, they learn how to play ukulele and tin whistle and all sorts. And sometimes children give it up when they leave school for a while, but if it's in you, it'll come back. and you'll always have musical friends wherever you go. You'll never be thrown out of a session because everybody likes to join in and have a bit of crack, you know.
You're also you also have a keen interest in the sort of heritage of the local area.
Yeah.
Where did that sort of spring from?
I suppose I always had an interest in history, and always had an interest in even when I go abroad, even on holiday, I want to know what's that building over there and what's that hill there and so on, and let's go on a tour and let's find out where we are and what it's all about. And it's no different here. I was always interested in history and interested in stories of long ago, and this area is I suppose like all areas, but this area is very rich in culture, but from the 1798 period and before even, you know. And we have Cathaoir's Den up on the Blackstairs, who was reputedly a highwayman, and he hid up there, and it was way off the beaten path back then. It's a little more accessible now, alright, you know, in some around the 1700s or that. And there's all sorts of stories. You can Google Cathaoir and find out more about him. But his den is reputedly up on the Blackstairs there, and it's an easy enough climb to go look at. And when you're up there, you can see, if it's a clear day, you can see Wales, you can see Rosslare, you can see up to Wicklow, you can see from the top of the Blackstairs, you can see the Galtee Mountains, Slievenamon, you can see the Slieve Blooms in Offaly and Laois. So it's a good trip, and it's nice. There are all sorts of stories going around about 1923 and the Civil War, and the 1916, the 1798 and stuff like that, and you hear families telling their own stories, and I suppose that's how I had an interest in all that sort of stuff. And it is interesting. It is interesting to keep it alive and not forget about the history, the good, the bad, and the ugly, whichever. And there's beautiful scenery around here as well, you know. From Came to Glenglass, Rathnure. We had Monk's Grange, where you had an abbey years ago. You have all across the White Mountain and into New Ross. There's some beautiful scenery and beautiful views, and from the mountains and from other areas as well. You have lots of Lacken Hill and Owlert Hill, Vinegar Hill, all famous places and battles of 1798. But even just to go up on them places and just look at the views and take in the whole breathtaking scenery that we have, it's nice, and it's nice to have it so close to hand, you know. If you're out in the prairies in America, you wouldn't see much of it.
And speaking of Cathaoir and the den, what about Mountain Sunday and that tradition?
Yeah, there was a tradition, you see, going back hundreds of years, where the people from the Carlow side of the mountain and the people from the Wexford side of the mountain would meet on the last Sunday of July for Frockin Sunday. Frockins are bilberries really, but we call them Frockins, and they'd be going up to pick the berries or see if there's any berries on the mountain around that time of the year. And tradition had it that they would meet on both sides of the mountain, and they do a bit of matchmaking and a bit of dancing. And because we didn't have TV and radio and all the rest of it, the stories would be passed about what's happening in Carlow and what's happening in Wexford and so on, and da-di-da-di-da every year. And it stopped around, I think that tradition kind of stopped around the early 70s, and I suppose people had cars and things like that then, and it was more of a thrill to go to Corracloe or to the seaside or Hook Head or somewhere like that, where people really didn't have great access to them places bar on a bicycle up to then, and more people had transport, and I suppose the tradition just died out. And a couple of years ago, Martin Codd and a couple more, Eddie and Hazel, were up on the mountain and they were on Frock on Sunday, and Eddie had sang a song called written a song called Underneath the Blackstairs, and he'd released it, and it was being played on Southeast Radio and other radio stations around and whatever, and local people were being named on it. Very lovely song, and they went up and they sang it on the mountain on the Blackstairs, and they were talking about bringing back maybe a bit of the Mountain Sunday nostalgia, if you like, and so the following year then and the following couple of years then we've set up a stage up there, and had some a couple of good years with music on the top of the mountain at a place called the Meeting Point, or the Cooley Gap, and again we'll have it this year, weather permitting, as well, on the last Sunday in July, and we provide music from different people, some from the area, some not, and we have some burgers, some sandwiches, some drinks and teas and coffees and whatever, and an enjoyable day had by all, I suppose, and we're trying to keep the tradition alive in a slightly different format.
Maybe changing the topic there, what do you think are the challenges that face the Blackstairs and the
well, I suppose from my point of view, it's an area that's not being utilised enough tourism wise. I personally think there could be some beautiful walkways from Wexford to Carlow, from the Carlow side, from the Wexford side to the Carlow side. Now some hikers do it, but it's not really accessible to everybody. And if there was some sort of a greenway made, and even up through the forest, a bit more parking space for people, that they could enjoy an afternoon up there on a fine day or whatever, and a big poster laminated with the area on a map, and that when you're there you know that you are here, the usual, and if you look to your west you see this, and you look to your north you see that, and you turn, so people when they go up, they know what the landmarks in the area, they know what they're looking at. And I think we see buses all the time getting off the boat in Rosslare, are coming down from Dublin, and they go straight to Kerry or Killarney area, Clare, up to Galway, and the east coast is largely bypassed, and that's probably our own fault. Now Kerry and the west is beautiful, but we have some beautiful scenery and beautiful beaches and stuff around here. The Coraclow and Ballinesker, all of that Wexford area is a huge stretch of sandy beach, and most Americans don't see it, and the same with the Blackstairs, and the same with Enniscorthy, and Wexford town is a heritage town, a Viking town, lots of history about there, and Bag and Bun in Fethard where the Normans landed, and we don't really, in my opinion, see enough of tourism in our area. So I think that could be expanded on hugely.
I just want to sort of return there actually to the social life. So you mentioned the rich musical history, and you discussed that. What was there available to you when you were, say, 18, 19, 20 years of age?
Well, I suppose we had, I was 18, 19, 20 years of age, there was a vibrant pub culture of music, which it's died down somewhat now, because a lot of the pubs now are closed, in where you would have 3 or 4 pubs in the village, you might have only one now, and they would be only open on the weekends. But there was a lot of music in the pubs them times. There is still some music in the pubs, but not as much. So mostly I suppose the dance halls died out, and after that you had the nightclubs started up, and when I was going out it was mostly nightclubs, and the discos were the order of the day. So that was about it really.
And would you have to travel far in order to go to one?
You would, yeah. You would. When I was growing up, when I was in my early 20s and that, and teens, the On Yoke or the Hydro in Kilmuckridge were the two big ones. Other than that, you'd have to go to Waterford or Wexford or somewhere like that. There wasn't anything local until Records opened up theirs, and I was already married and settled at that time. My disco days were gone.
And what about the GAA?
A GAA is always important in Ireland, and especially in local communities, you know. Rathnure and Clubon would have always been, because their neighbouring parishes would have always been big rivals, and there's always a dispute as to whether a certain number of people on a particular team should be actually playing for the opposing team or not, you know, because you would have people from Clubon who played with people technically from Rathnure who were playing with Clubon, and you'd have a bit of rivalry there the whole time, you know. And like Martin Codd, for example, played with Rathnure all his life, where his brother John and all his family were only down the road were Clubon players, you know. So there was never any real. There was always a bit of jiving about it and so on, but I don't think there was any real animosity, except for when a match would be disputed as to whether the ref was favouring one team or another. The usual thing in usual politics and banter. But GA most important in all rural communities in Ireland, I think, and now I suppose it's even more so, because again they start them younger at playing and they have an interest in it at a younger age, and a lot of them then continue on up through the ranks until work really takes over and some people can't make training anymore, and even the best of players have to stop because they're working away or whatever. But there's great interaction between clubs and between families and so on, and it's really a hub of community spirit in both Clubon and Rathnure. And if you go over in the summer months, any evening of the week, the pitches are full. So it's great, and it's no different in any other county in Ireland, I would imagine.
Did you play yourself growing up?
I did. I played for the Duffy Rovers in Came, because I went to school in Came, but even though I was in parish of Rathnure, because Came school was nearer and there was a bus going to Came school and there was no bus going to Rathnure. So I played there until I played with them until I was only about 14, and then I stopped. I gave up. To be honest with you, I didn't like togging out in the ditch on a cold, wet winter's evening. And now they have all sorts of facilities, you know, and they have showers after it and all the rest of it, you know, and the showers before the match and showers after the match and physios and all the rest of it. I had to ride on a bicycle of a wet evening, and then sometimes find that because there was no mobile phones around, that the match had been cancelled and yourself and a couple of friends are the only ones there because nobody told you, you know, and I just got fed up of it, to be honest with you. But as I say, now they have everyone has loads of proper clubhouses and proper facilities, you know. My father-in-law was big into the Clubon and president of the Clubon GA and all the rest of it, and selector on teams at different times. And I remember one of the lads said that he came into the dressing room one day and everyone was spraying themselves with deodorant and all the rest of it before the match even. And he said, "For God, lads," he said, you know, he says, "if you played as good as you smelled, we'd never lose a match."
On the subject there, actually, of the rivalries between very close parishes, I'm very interested in that sort of local sense that, you know, someone from one side of the parish can be considered, you know, very different, even though geographically they're not that far.
Oh,
away.
absolutely.
When you settled here in Clonroach, were you sort of regarded as a blow-in or anything like that?
No, actually, for me personally, anyway, I was made very welcome in Clonroach from the very minute I set foot in the place. They're a very, very nice crowd down here, and they welcome everybody. A dub can be a Clonroach man in a very, very short space of time, and especially if you can play soccer or GA or something like that, you're immediately considered a true club on person, you know. Uh, it's a vibrant community down here. There's lots of activities and things to do, and no, and even in you see, the thing is that a lot of the parishes are intermarried, you know. So you've lots of Club-on men marrying Club-on women, and Club-on women marrying Rathnure men, and so and vice versa. Club-on men marrying Rathnure women. So the rivalry is there while the match is on, you know. And when the match is over, it's gone again. Rathnure, and years ago, Rathnure and Club-on were playing a match in a county final. I can't remember the year, but I had a Rathnure flag out of my side of the car, and Marie had the Club-on flag out of her side of the car. So I suppose that tells it all, doesn't it?
You mentioned when you first moved to Clonroach. What was it like being sort of moving into the community around here?
It was actually very easy. Everyone was very friendly, and I knew that from before because I had worked up at Paddy Donlan's fruit farm a few years before that for the summer, and I found everyone around my own age at that time that was up there were very friendly, and we got on very well. But I actually, when I moved down, what you could say full time, I moved into my brother-in-law was in England, who wasn't my brother-in-law at the time. He was my girlfriend's brother, and I moved into his house because it was vacant and he was in England at the time. And I remember going over one night to the pub, and it was actually the Paddy Dials, and I sat down, and there was some function on or something, but a guy came over, and I knew Jim Rebnan, who was over the soccer club, and he's helped found the soccer club in Club-on, and he still has an active part in it today. And he came over, and Marie introduced him to me and said, he said, "Who's this?" And she says, "Oh, this is Tony. He's living up in Pat's house there. He's Tony Asple from Rathnure." And he said, "All right. Well, how are you, Tony?" He says, "And would you like to join the soccer club? Come on up." He says, "And we'll get you going." And I thought it was such a nice gesture. It was my first time in the pub, like, and already I was being kind of made felt accepted and stuff. But Clonroach is very like that anyway. I found, so it was great. It was a lovely gesture. I didn't get to play soccer actually because I was working away at the time. I was in the meat factories at the time, and it was very seasonal, and I used to be away for the week, so on the weekend I was just jacked, so there was no chance of me going to play soccer. But very welcoming community, and I think most places in the country in Ireland are like that. Once you show your face at all, if you can play music, play GAA, play soccer, play darts, whatever, you'll be made welcome. And if you can't, somebody will show you how.
What do you think makes this area then different from other areas of Ireland?
I don't know if there's that much of a difference. The culture is the same in Ireland regardless of where you go, I think, and people are very attached to their area regardless of where they are. So I couldn't see that there. I worked abroad. I worked away, like in the meat factories. We worked away before. I now do satellite TV and aerials and stuff like that. But when I was working in the factories, in the meat factories, and travelling from up to Rosscray or down to Clonmel, or we were working in Waterford or wherever, and we were living in the local community for the week while especially if it was far away, like Kilbeggan in Westmeath. I worked for a while there, and you go into Offaly or into Tullamore, or you go into the village in Kilbeggan and whatever, and it's the same sort of stuff, They're giving out about the local. The Kilbeggan GA are giving out about the local, the next parish's GA, and how why did they bloody win that match, and da. And sure, that fella shouldn't be even playing with him. Sure, he's a Kilbeggan man, It's the same thing, and I suppose that's what makes us good, makes us unique in that regard. We have a culture of GA and a culture of music which brings us together, and you can have all the fights and the rows and the given out about the matches and so on. But at the end of the day, it's just what makes the communities tick.
If sort of moving on to the last few questions.
Sure.
If you were to bring a tourist here, so you mentioned that there should be more developed. What would you show a tourist if they came here and they had a day to spend?
Okay, well, I would definitely. Are you just talking about this area here now, or
Blackstairs more generally, but also around here?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'd definitely bring him up to Blackstairs, and I have done. I'll bring him up to Carharuas then, because it's an easy climb from the meeting point. It's not too difficult for anybody, and show them the views. Point out the different landmarks that I pointed out, that I told you about before. I'll bring him to a music session somewhere, especially if there were foreigners. If they were from abroad, which I have done with some Americans. And another thing we have is Castlebora, and Castlebora is an old English mansion that was burnt in the Troubles in 1923, and again, Castle BORO, so you can look it up on the internet. You'll see the pictures of it before the fire, and the pictures are ruins now. But Queen it's only down the road there, but Queen Victoria visited that place, and there's a lot of history attached to that as well. The Carews were there, and they're buried in Killegny graveyard, and one of them, one of the Lady Carews, lived to be in 3 centuries. She was born in 1799 and died in 1901 or 1902. She was 104. So her grave is in Killegny graveyard there, and tapestries that the Carew, the women and the maid are still hanging in the Church of Ireland in Killegny, and that's another bit of history there. It's a pity that in my opinion, it's a pity that the place was burned, but I suppose the sentiment of the time was probably, I don't know if you could say understandable. I'm trying to work out, but I've often worked it out in my head. Tried to work it out in my head, and it depends on what viewpoint you come from. I mean, at the end of the day, it was burnt. I suppose it was 800 years of British rule, and some of that was very, very harsh rule, and I suppose the people were just sick of it and wanted to get rid of them and their mansions and such. On the other hand, it was a shame to see such a fine building being destroyed, because it could have been now a wonderful place to visit, and maybe a big golf course on it, or wherever, a hotel, or just a fine stately home like you'd see in the UK, and get thousands or hundreds of thousands of visitors every year, but people didn't think that way in 1923, so you have to understand the mentality at the time. And Coolbawn House was burnt, along with lots of other houses around the country at the time as well, and Coolbawn House was owned by the Bruins. They were absentee landlords, and that was burned as well. My grandmother actually remembers seeing the fires of Coolbawn House being burned when she was a child. She was born around 1914, and it was burnt in 1923, so she was able to tell me she remembers seeing the fire, So it's a pity. Maybe it depends on, as I said, on your viewpoint, but I can understand the sentiment at the time, but I still think it was a shame that it was done. I mean, the government ended up having to pay the insurance to the families who owned the house anyway. So there you go. And the British were a lot. They realised their time was up. Especially the big landlords realised their time was up at that stage anyway, and most of them had left. So that's two places that could have been widely used by the Board of Works or OPW or whoever, because when you go to the UK and you see all the mansions that are, some of them are in disrepair, but most of them are well kept, and the lords and the ladies, even if they're their descendants, even if they're still alive, it's the National Trust really have the houses, and they may be living in a small part of them, but they wouldn't be able to keep them in the good trim now, like, because all their tenants now would be, they wouldn't have the big tenants anymore giving them all the rent, you know.
You touched on something interesting there, actually, your grandmother's memories of seeing the flames. You also mentioned that there are stories of the Civil War and the War of Independence around here.
Yeah.
But it's also a period that has a lot of silences, and people weren't really willing to talk about very much.
Oh,
at
yeah.
the time. What was it like? More recently, people are more willing to talk, and it's become more with the decade of centenaries and everything. But when you were younger, and even to the 1980s,
it wasn't talked about at all.
Yeah.
Wasn't talked about at all. You see, people that were involved in all that were still around, you know, and so it wasn't talked about, really. Maybe in hushed quarters or something, but definitely I wouldn't have heard anything about it. And no one that I know around my age wouldn't have heard anything about it either, really, you know. You see, families were pitted against families in the Civil War, like, and brother against brother and cousin against cousin and stuff on different sides, on anti-treaty sides and treaty sides and so on. So you might have read something in the books about it, but it wouldn't have been widely talked about in the localities or anything like that, you know. It was a kind of, the least said, the easiest mended, I think, you know. It's good now that it's coming out, and we're starting to open up about it and realise that regardless of what happened, it wasn't anything to do with us personally or our parents personally either, like, you know. So you can't be held responsible for what's your ancestors did or didn't do, you know.
Yeah.
So that's why it becomes easier to talk about, I suppose.
Absolutely. I've got one last question that I've sort of asked for every person, but is there anything that we haven't talked about to this point that you'd like to talk about?
Not really sure. Just going back to the tourism again, there's loads of forest walks around and things, and it could be exploited a bit more as well, you know. I still think it's a shame to see all the buses going to the west. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the west, and they should have their fair share, but this area has been largely overlooked, you know, and you won't see it in any tourist guides, but you'll see plenty about Killarney and so on and so on. And I suppose it's probably the people in the area themselves that are to blame. Like, it's not, the people in Killarney are doing a great job, and the people in Kerry and Clare and all that, their tourist boards or the people themselves are doing a great job, but we've kind of let it slip, I think, and that's, I think that would bring a lot of, if it was done properly and coordinated properly, it would bring a lot of business and a lot of good economic development to the area, you know. But other than that, I don't think I have anything more really to say, unless you have something to ask me yourself that I have left out, or you might think I've left out.
No, I don't think so. I'll just quickly consult my notes. Okay, I think we've covered most of what I had here anyway. So the last question, and you can sort of take your time with this because it can be tough to sort of sum up. But what does it mean to you to be from this area, to be living in this area?
Well, I suppose it means everything to me, because my family is all around here, apart from my all around the Rathnure and Ascarty, Timon area, all around that area. Like all my families in County Wexford, really, close family members, and apart from my sister who's in Germany, but with cheap flights, it's possible to see her quite often then, and for her to come over with her family as well. So there's a great sense of community here, both in Rathnure, in Clonroach, and so on, and you feel grounded here. You feel part of the community, and I suppose that's the reason that I like it here. And you when I'm 60 years of age, so you've developed over the years plenty of friends and plenty of connections in all sorts of areas of life, whether it's business or social or whatever, and it's nice to have that. If you left now, you'd have to start trying to build that again in some other area, in some other part of the world, or some other part of the country, and I try fix it if it isn't broken. So that's about it.
Great. All right. Well, we might wrap it up there. Thanks very much, Tony, for speaking to me tonight, and I hope you enjoyed the interview.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks very much. Thank you.